Hey, you have Patrick Findaro here, co-founder at Vetted Biz. Very excited to have on Tom Spadea, a franchise attorney based in Philadelphia that has worked with many of our prior clients at Visa Franchise. So yeah, Tom and I were at the happy hour kickoff at the Franchise Brokers Association event, and we thought it was about time to have Tom on again. It was maybe 4 years ago we did a little webinar for our Visa franchise clients, and now that we've brought in to be more focused on American investors, there's a lot of important things you need to look at before signing a franchise agreement from a legal standpoint, et cetera. So just wanted to have Tom on to kind of talk everything that a franchisee needs to know before they sign that franchise agreement. So
Fantastic.
Tom, thanks for joining.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I mean, it's as it gets colder up here in Philadelphia, it was nice being able to stand outside. Although it was actually a cold day there for the people who were there.
Well, we have plenty of offices here in South Beach if you ever want to get away.
That's right.
For a long weekend and work on Monday or Tuesday.
You know. My youngest is finishing high school this year, so we may not be that far away from that. Cool. Look, I love talking about this topic. I mean, whether it's in person here on the opportunity through video. I mean, franchising is wonderful. It's been wonderful to me. It's been wonderful to a lot of people, and I think my background. I actually started in this business doing franchise brokerage and franchise sales. So I've had the law firm for 10 years now. We're 14 attorneys. We represent a few hundred brands and, a few hundred franchisees every year, kind of cycle through with helping them get into franchising. But so my baseline, I come from an entrepreneurial family. I was a finance major. I love the strategy and thought and business, reading about it and just trying to really understand the nature of it. And I think it's no accident that franchising has exploded like it has, because it's found that nice niche of structure and support, but yet a certain amount of autonomy, but not so much autonomy that people get themselves in trouble, right? You end up losing more weight and healthier when you actually show up with your personal trainer. Not that I want to talk about COVID-19, we can do a whole nother conversation on that, but do what I say, not what I do. But the reality is, franchising is a big piece of that. And from a legal standpoint, I think before you even get into the weeds, if you're looking at this and you're considering investing and buying in a franchise, I would actually challenge that first word. You're not really buying it in the traditional sense of buying a business. You're really buying a business model and a platform, and you're renting the business. And, for some people, that might turn them off, but you have to just drill into it and think, look, if you're a franchisor and you're going to create this big system, you're going to do that, you're taking a much higher risk. A lot less of those folks are successful, but they have a much greater return. Basic supply and demand, basic economic laws are really at play here. If you're a franchisee, you've reduced the risk because you're in it with others. You have this ecosystem, you have a structure, you have experience. And so, that risk reduction is trade-off of you may not blow it out 100x of what you think.
It's going to take you more time. It's going to take 10, 20 plus locations, build over 5+ years.
Well, right. And so if you take the strategy of, hey, I am really the boots on the ground. And some people also lose sight of the fact they think the franchisor is out there just for the capital. And obviously that's a portion of it. But, if you've been successful and you have, a few $100,000 to invest, the reality is you pick up the Wall Street Journal, you see anything, there's plenty of capital out there. There's plenty of cash. What's really lacking is human capital.
Operators.
They want operators. They want someone who is going to execute the plan. And I see that, and you really see that. I mean, a corporate run store is never as well run as a franchise run store. And at some point, someone starts running out of uncles and cousins and family members and really close friends, and it might be at 5 stores, it might be at 15, but they realize each incremental growth gets harder. So they turn to folks who are looking at this video who say, hey, I don't want to go through that pain. I don't know but I know that in my local market, I've always been successful in sales. I understand finances. I understand how to run a business. I just don't know what business to run. And instead of getting a sort of a job, you basically get control of it, and now you own it. So like leasing a car. You can't paint it purple and, give it a 6-inch lift and expect to return it. But you can, the money you spend for leasing a car, you can get more car. And it's a very similar type of analogy when you go into a franchise. So you have to go in understanding that these rules are there. They're not there to confine you. They're there to bring some predictability to your own business model. And as a lawyer, when we're looking at franchise agreements, so one of the things, and there's plenty of great franchise lawyers out there, but if you're exploring franchising, you need to talk to a franchise lawyer, because we understand the relationship. So you have the franchisor, you have the franchisee. If this is a lease and it's a real estate transaction, there's two parties. There's the landlord and there's the tenant, and it's a zero-sum game. If he pays to, I'll say, snow removal, back to teasing about Florida, if the landlord, he or she pays for the snow removal, then you don't, and vice versa. Franchise is a different animal. So when you're a franchisee and you're buying into the franchise system, you're investing in that, you have to think about it. It's really not just you and the landlord. I mean, you and as the analogy of the tenant, it's not just you and the franchisor, it's you, the franchisor, and the brand and the system. In fact, I tell people, and this sounds counterintuitive, if I'm legally hired to represent a franchisee, I tell a franchisee, beware of the franchisor that changes too much, because that doesn't help you. If someone down the road is not, you laugh at that, right? Because you think,
no, it makes
really?
a lot of sense.
If
And
someone down the
people
road is not upholding brand standards, if the franchisor was so desperate to make a deal in a sale that they gave away the store, that's going to impact you, especially in today's world of
well,
Google
there's like,
reviews.
I don't know if you saw this. I'm sure your kids know it. Mr. Beast Burger. This guy has like a crazy big YouTube channel where basically anyone with a kitchen restaurant can sell hamburgers on Uber. But
Okay.
I was going through the reviews. The brand quality is horrible. People are
Right.
selling these hamburgers under the Mr. Beast Burger brand, which is not a franchise. And there's just no brand consistency. So there's 400 plus locations selling this business. It's probably going to die in a year. The
And
reviews are
exactly.
horrible.
And that's exactly the line of thinking. That's a great story to tell prospective franchisees. You're actually investing in the brand and you're a piece of that brand. So a strict franchising, now there are some things you can change. There are some risk mitigation. You gotta, as lawyers, we think of, what if the disaster happens and what if the home run happens? Because everybody's thinking in the middle band.
Yeah. Yeah. Plan. It's like you should plan for like the 50% or the 30th percentile of franchisees instead of like the top 5%. A lot of people see the franchise disclosure document, and a lot of franchisors will advertise. I don't know how this is legal, but they'll advertise average sales, average income, and then in the fine print, it's like the top 20% of franchisees.
So it's funny, really give you a behind the scenes look at how we put together some of these FDDs, and it's all, you disclose it. So when you say that top 20%, you disclose in a chart, and it's item 19. Now, first of all, that is not the most important number in an FDD in terms of so those of you who are new to this, if you're a franchisor, you have to give prospective franchisees the franchise disclosure document, which spells out 23 items about the management team, the cost, and all these things. And in there is your franchise agreement. So, to see those ads and to see those numbers, a lot of people looking at franchising. Item 19 is the financial performance representation. It's typically average sales. What was this? What were the dollars? What's the history? What's the financial history? But that, to me, is really only a piece that gives you a broad look. The most important item in an FDD for a prospective franchisee to look at is item 20, which is the list of all the other franchisees. They're the ones who are going to tell you that's the truth. That's where the validation. And sometimes people
with that, you have the transfers, which ones are closing, what's been reacquired by the franchisor.
And there's no magic bullet to this stuff. You should read it, because if it's properly put together, which you would expect it's properly put together, there's a lot of data in there, and each one's a data point. Each one just gives you a data point, and you can kind of get this arc, and you get this sense of even the data point of how many things can you change. Look, if people hire us, we're always going to ask for something. We're going to ask for 8 to 10 things. strategic things, and we're probably going to get half of them, and sometimes we're going to get zero. And just because we got zero, it doesn't mean it's a bad deal, because the strictest franchisors are sometimes the strongest brands. So you are just, and back to kids, I try to tell my kids this: you really want to have success in life, you have to have a lot of empathy. You have to think about things from the perspective of the other side, and a good franchisor should have empathy and think about things from the franchisee side. But it's a two-way street. So if you're a franchisee or a prospective franchisee, you have to think about, the value proposition from the franchisor. They've created this brand. They've nurtured this brand. They've learned from this, and they're just going to share in that success. I mean, you strip it all away, that's franchising. We thought of something. We're going to teach you how to do it, and we're going to share in your success. And then all the lawyers and consultants and all the people overcomplicate the soup. But basically, at its purest, that's exactly what franchising is. So even though it's counterintuitive, as strict as that contract is, if you do this, if you don't put the pickles this way, if you don't, drive our sign, if you don't show up and we don't approve you in training, the reality is, if you pay your bills and you pay your royalties, it's very hard for them to kick you out. But as a franchisee, you can pretty much walk and sell your business. So that's another level.
You can assign that lease to someone else, sometimes for a loss, sometimes at a nice profit.
But you have a cleaner exit. If you're a bad partner, if they're not a great partner to you, and you're like, they're not supporting me, and I don't like these people anymore, and I don't like the new CEO, you can sell. Whereas if you're a bad partner to them, they're tied up. So that's also part of that, like, understanding.
The marriage. These are usually 10 years agreements.
It's usually 10 years. And it's usually, it's 10 years, and you should base it on that. I don't like short agreements. I think 10 years is a good time for the franchisee and the franchisor. But really, and in some states like New Jersey, you can't even just terminate them without cause. You have to, you're obligated to give the franchisees an extension. And my experience is, people get very worried about that. My experience is franchisors, they're in the business of having you have this perpetual thing. So it is 10 years, but it's really until you're sick of it, and then you want to monetize it, and then you want to sell it. In fact, those are some of the things that we ask for. We think that you have a little leverage on the renewals and things like that, things that are so far out that the management
what's the transfer fee? Are you gonna have to, is the new guy buying the system gonna have to pay the franchise fee over again, or is it half the franchise fee? Because that, if it's a service-based franchise, it just costs you a $100K with a $40K franchise fee. That could be a big part of the sale price.
Right. And then they also will say, or a 50% of the then current. Well,
oh wow, yeah.
So you're just going to make it $100,000. Now I got to pay 50 grand. So we try to carve that, and we try to corral that. And those are usually pretty reasonable asks. But if you don't ask, you're not going to get it, and you're obligated. If it's the then current franchise fee, and they're not able to sell franchises anymore, but they have 100 units that need to renew, why wouldn't they just make their franchise fee $100,000? So I'm okay with transfer fees, because I think that's a reasonable cost that the franchisor has. They
have to train the new franchisee.
Exactly.
There's a lot of costs associated with that, for sure.
Renewal fees, however, I think it's reasonable to push back on that.
I've seen that a lot of franchisors now are charging nothing, or at least half the franchise fee.
Exactly. Or half of that. But that's one, if I see half in there, that's something so that's something we ask for, because it's reasonable. There's a reasonable basis for it. And, back to empathy, that's probably not affecting the commission of the salesperson or the CEO 10 years from now. That's somebody else's problem. So, you got to always just know but it's a big deal. That could be $35,000 so many years from now.
For sure. And I think your firm's helped with a few of our clients where, especially when they're coming from abroad and they're not opening up the business right away, to not have that minimum royalty kick in where they're paying $2,000 a month, but the business hasn't really even opened. They're not taking customers in.
Yeah. And then sometimes, you try to, exactly. And that's normally something that franchisors won't negotiate. But if you can make the case that this is a special case, you have someone coming in, it may take everything we've dealt with in the last couple of years. There may be a 1-year delay that we don't foresee. It's, we shouldn't be getting that. And, back to that minimum royalty, you want to go back to item 20, you want to understand a franchisor, ask the franchisees how their franchisor was during the last couple of years, during the pandemic. For a lot of our clients, they were hurting, but they worked with them on the minimum royalty. They deferred a lot of stuff. They went down. And I think that is, franchising's hot again and deals are happening, but I think those who treated their franchisees well are in a better position.
How did they do during a crisis? Whether
Exactly.
it's this pandemic or the financial crisis, how was the founder, the president, did they downgrade their personal lifestyle at the benefit of the franchisees, or did they, keep everything the same just so their lifestyle could maintain?
100%. And not just the global crisis, but an internal crisis. How do they come together? Do the franchisees feel really part of a team, or do they feel that the franchisor is at odds with them and something to be put up with? And those are the kind of things that, at some level of contract will tell you, because you can get like a flavor of it, but it's really the ecosystem and the culture of and the leadership. What's that leadership like? Do they really care? Because, franchisors are compensated on the top line. So sometimes you'll get franchisors that have this incentive to just drive sales at the expense of profitability. And so I like to hear franchisors saying, they talk about profits. They have, back to these onerous rules. I want the franchisor to be able to look in my QuickBooks and have it all stitched together and put out reports, because I'm a competitive person. So if I knew that I wasn't at the top of the mat, I'd be upset and I'd say, hey, I want to get towards the top here. So I want to know what is the occupancy cost of my peer group? What is their labor cost? Where do I fit within this? And why is that person an outlier? They're doing great. I want to go have a cup of coffee with this guy and say, hey, how are you doing it? What are you doing differently than I am? And that's really that's a huge intangible benefit of franchising, is that you have this peer group. It's these little experiments. We're all in the same business. We're scattered around the country. We're not competing with one another, but we can learn with one another. And all of those improvements start to incrementally drive a system better.
And probably if you're having that transparency of the data and sharing beyond just like stories that franchisees are telling each other about getting business. I mean, you could see someone in a food business having their labor costs at 21%, where the average is 28. And it's like, what's that guy doing that it's
right
21% when really bringing down his cost of goods sold?
And so I think it's
other factors.
I think it's a fair question for franchisees to ask, basics, is there a standard chart of accounts that all franchisees adhere to? That's a good question. That's a good tell. And franchising is getting more professionalized. There is more investment in that. So, you want to make sure that you're getting into a system that is going to give you what you expect it to give you. And it starts with those basic, you want to be part of a well-run franchisor. You don't want to be, if you think you're going to go there and change it, you shouldn't buy that franchise, because you're not, and you're going to be frustrated, and they're going to be frustrated with you. My best advice to if you want to be successful in franchising and you want to be a successful franchisee, my brother was buying a franchise. I would say, if the franchisor tells you to do this 10 times a week, do it 20.
Yeah.
They tell you to do this, double it. They're the most successful franchisees. Head down, execute, rinse, repeat, rinse,
You see
repeat.
a lot of veterans that do really well in franchising, and it's no coincidence.
Exactly.
They're used to managing a lot of people and executing the mission.
I agree. We have a couple of veteran brands that are like primarily veteran run, and absolutely. Now the flip side to sometimes veterans and sometimes people coming out of big corporate America, because you get a corporate guy who might say, hey, I'm pretty good. I can follow things on a tool. But the problem is there's a little bit of a blend of autonomy and being in your own business, which I always felt that professional sports guys would be great franchisees. Hey, follow a team, part of a team, execute. But there's some basic business knowledge that they lack, and that trips them up. And sometimes that trips up veterans. But the good franchises that focus on that say, look, we'll teach you about small business. We'll teach you about the accounting and all that, but you take your leadership and all of that. And as ironic as it is, sometimes people who come from really large businesses struggle in franchising because they never saw the piece of it. They were part of 1/10 of 1%. And yeah, They ran a 20 million or a $50 million
How
division.
about like hiring and firing? As an entrepreneur, you can fire someone for, in most states, I believe, for any reason, and they're out the next day.
Correct.
Try to fire, someone in the military or at a big corporation. You need to get 3 approvals.
That's a great one. I didn't think of it. You're totally right. And that's being an entrepreneur. If you have 6 people in your company and you have one that's toxic, you got to get rid of them.
And it's no fun firing. So how do you cultivate the talent? And, if you're high level executive or, high up in the military, you're not probably as focused on cultivating those entry level people to rise up and stay in your organization.
And you're not responsible for it. You're not responsible for recruiting. And now, because
you could be moving to another position and you don't mind, he's stuck in that role and you're off to something else.
Exactly. So that's so that you have to think about, you're making a double decision as a franchisee. You're making a decision to be a small business owner, which means if the trash guy doesn't show up, you're taking out the trash. If your bathroom janitor staff doesn't show up, you better have clean toilets. If you're a restaurant,
you got to check your ego at the door. Like, my brother, Jack, he worked at Restaurant Brands International, and he worked at Burger King in right in South Beach. And part of the training program to see what it's like to, be a
100%.
franchisee, understand the operations, and you're working behind the counter.
Correct.
And dealing with when I visited him once, there was a guy, like a half naked guy coming in, and he had to kick him out. And
that's great experience. I mean, I think, and look, food service is probably only about a third of, that's always a big deal also.
It's an easy example because everyone knows it.
But it is a big part of it. And I think working in food service or working in a restaurant gives you, I think I might have told you this, I told both my kids, I'll pay for your college, but in high school, you're going to work in food service because I want them to get that experience, to get out there and interact with the public. That's exactly what your role is as a franchisee. Now, there's business to business franchises. There's more professional franchises. But at the end of the day, you are a small business owner. You have a microcosm, and your franchisor is there. You're the player and they're the coach. So, you can get the best equipment. You can get the best training. You can work really hard, but you have to go out there and score the goals. You have to get out on the field and do it. And if you're a franchisee, you have to embrace and love that. And, you have to go through the path of knowing that if you're successful, you have only yourself to thank. The corollary to that is if you're not successful, you have to take some culpability and responsibility. So as lawyers, sometimes people think, oh, lawyers, I got the best, they're going to go negotiate for me and beat these people up. You don't want that either, because you're entering into a relationship. So our attitude is, when people hire us, and the feedback we've gotten, our attitude is, our job is to really explain the relationship so that there's no surprises. So at the 6 months from now, they're not, how come I'm getting charged this technology fee? We will have gone over that. We will have said, I know they're not charging you, but they could. And here's why. Here are the parameters. And we also try not to take this is good, this is bad approach. I mean, sometimes there are things that you say, yeah, this is really bad. But for the most part, it's a data point. It's not good. It's not bad. People, wow, should I get the insurance? Should I get this? I don't know. I mean, when you bought your iPhone, did you buy insurance? There's no right or wrong answer for that. If you're really,
what's your risk tolerance? What's your circumstance?
And we can't answer that. All we can do is
explain it to them well.
You give them the data and they make the decision. And the franchisor also can't do that. The consultants can't do that. Their accountant can't do that. Their spouse will probably do it, but everybody else will have to really just tell you and dial you in to say, here's a data point. You have to make the decision.
It's their decision. At the end of the day, if it's a bust, you don't want to, it's your fault that you invested in that business.
And so I always think
you had advisors helping you communicate the findings, but it falls on you as the franchisee.
100%. And it's a culture fit. They need to be thinking about, do I personally identify with the high performers in this system? And I think that is a better tell. We were talking about item 19 and about the financials. I think one mistake prospective franchisees make is they get too buried in the weeds. I mean, you mentioned it. You see this ad and they're like, oh, that's the average of the top 20%. So first of all, everybody thinks of themselves in the top 20%. So
Sure.
franchisors
You want to
say,
aspire to the top 1%, but
correct.
are you going to
But
get there?
It's a logical impossibility, because at the end, if 100 people do it, 20 of them are going to be in the
Also,
top
it's
20%.
time. We've looked at like a property management franchise, bookkeeping franchise. The top 10% have been open for 5 to 15 years.
Right.
You can't even play at that game for 5 years.
And you don't know ultimately. So one question people always ask is, how much money can I make? And the way that I always will, and I do a lot of broker training and franchisor training, and sales training. And the way that you answer that question is you say, I don't know. And that's that's the answer I give the franchisee prospects. I don't know. If you are, sometimes engineers and accountants struggle in this evaluation process. If you're in that mindset, buy an apartment building that you know what the rent rolls are, you know what your vacancy rate is.
Lever it up and
Exactly. Go get a mutual fund. Franchising isn't that.
There's a lot of variability. Like, it's less variability than like starting your own business, but at the end of the day, how long is it going to take to get the permit? How long it's going to take to break even, to match your past income? And it could be a couple years, 3 years to hit where you were making back at
and
your
you could never
job.
hit it.
You could
And
never
you might say, okay, so
are you fine with that?
Let me reduce my time commitment and let me have a plan B. And there's just a lot of variables. That's a good way to explain it. I mean, the variables of owning a business are here. You shrink it with a franchise, but there's still a massive amount of unknown and upheaval. And you can reduce that risk by getting the right professionals. But yeah, no, you're totally right. That's what do you think prospective franchisees are most worried about?
Most worried, I think probably, telling, they won't admit this, but to tell their family or friends it didn't work out, because they're obviously super excited about investing in whatever concept. They told their prior colleagues, they updated their LinkedIn. For it to not work out, hopefully they can check their ego at the door, and it might not work out and they learn from it. But I think the fear of not working out and not providing for their family, if that's the number one objective of their franchise decision, is
you're right.
overhanging.
That's a great perspective. I think you're totally right. I think it is fear. I think that, if you really want to be successful in business, you have to get rid of your fear and your ego and your pride. You just have to have no pride. You just got to be like, whatever. And
Check it at the door.
If it doesn't work out and you've put things in place where you've had enough hedges, that's okay too, because, you never really fail on anything. You've learned from it. So the next time you're not starting from zero, the next time look, I've had massive, disastrous setbacks in my own life professionally. And so the next time that I started, I wasn't starting over. I was starting with all of that stuff that wasn't
everything that you learned.
So you just have to learn, and franchising is a good experiment for that, because you really can. And I think you also get people who have that a little bit more of a fear mindset. That's why they're more comfortable in franchising. And so I think that's a totally appropriate thing to address with other franchisees, with your professionals, with things of saying, and then talk it through. All right, well, what if this doesn't happen? Let's see, let's put the pieces of
I'm advising a lot of people, 18 months, put your head down. 18 months, you're working hard, 40, 50, 60 hours a week. I've seen very few cases where it doesn't work out, where they're solely committed to that business and they're working up to 60 hours a week. But you got to commit at least a year and a half, 2 years.
And then you pick your head up and say, is this what I want to do? And if it's not, you get out. If
you get a manager, there might be enough margin for a general manager to sell the business. There's definitely options.
Well, that's when it really pays off. You get successful franchisees after they go through that painful period. You then understand small business. The really successful people in franchising have multiple brands.
Yes.
They know their area. They know their management. They understand. They've taught themselves that skill of small business. If you know the skill of small business and you know the skill of execution,
there's a lot of stuff you can sell.
There's a lot of stuff you can push through that. Your own little franchise, your own little empire, multi-brand. And that's why. So back to those numbers, I always say it's you should look at it like kind of from afar. It's like one of those those Monet paintings where it's all just sort of fuzzy. don't, it's a forest. It kind of looks like a pond with a bridge. So I know that's where I want to be, but I don't have all those details. I don't know exactly what kind of trees they are. And that's how you should treat the financials. I look at item 19. I could be at any end of the spectrum, but I know that this is a business that can generate 7 figures in revenue. It's not a home out of my bus. They have average 7 employees. This is a business I could see myself in. And that's how that should be really the way you think about the numbers, because you can talk yourself into anything.
For sure.
And one of your biggest
And you
enemies
get confirmation bias or the opposite.
100%. And you're your own enemy. I can go, if I just change this cell from 14% to 16%, hey, it looks like a lot better of an investor. That's not how the real world works.
Yeah. I mean, you can get as much into the financial engineering, but the more time you spend on that, I mean.
And know that the franchisors know that, and maybe the unscrupulous ones play on that. And so you have to be above that fray. They're there. Everybody has a role to play. They're there to sell you that franchise. They're there to recruit you into that. So you just have to know that going in, you need these data points, and you need to talk to the other franchisees and say, is this a sustainable business? Are there barriers to entry to other people coming into this business?
I mean, there's a lot of fitness brands that anyone could just open up tomorrow. The brand equity's out there. You're
Correct.
paying for a brand that started 3 years ago.
And maybe they have the software. Maybe they have the brand. Maybe they have the training. Maybe they have the passion.
Maybe they give you leads. And I've seen a lot. You probably have seen a lot of changes in the franchisor-franchisee relationship, but some recent trends, especially talking to a lot of the franchisors at the conference we were at a couple weeks back, is franchisors, it's like divide and conquer. Franchisor, marketing, getting the lead, booking the appointment.
Right.
Franchisee, delivering the customer service, operation, hiring, firing. Where has that been? Is this a new thing, or am I just digging in more to these?
I think it's more and more, because I think it's the technology the job of the franchisor is to create the brand, is to create the parameters and the brand experience. And the job of the franchisee is to deliver the brand experience. And I think the setting of appointments, it's all about scale. So if I have, 20 people, is it better for me to do a call center and pass that cost around? And it becomes, I think successful small businesses have a strong barrier to entry to their other competitors. So if you have scale and you get more national, you then have more resources that you pool together. And then what that does is it makes you a much stronger competitor than the
nice moat.
Exactly. And that's a good question to ask. And that it doesn't have to be 20 or 200. You could have that kind of moat mindset, but is that where the brand is headed? It's not so easy to duplicate, both on the traditional sense, logo, brand promise, what people think. But I think it's less about that in today's world, quite frankly. I think it's more about execution. So I think, yes, I think you see that trend. And I think that the value proposition for a franchisor is how profitable the unit level franchisees are, because that's what's going to drive scalability. So when they say, hey, we'll book the appointments for you, because boy, they look at the numbers and they're like, if you're a 4-person operation, I mean, we're doing this call, and if my phone rings right now, I'm not going to answer it. But if I'm a franchisee of a roofing company, someone's Googling the roofing company. If I miss that
you
phone
need a
call,
solution.
You're going to call the next
realtor.
person.
Have you ever gone to visit a house and the realtor is just picking up the phone? It's like,
yeah, that's where the market is. It's so competitive out there.
yes. I mean, the US is a ridiculously competitive market, and we've worked with a lot of mutual clients where they're coming from abroad and they're great entrepreneurs, but capital's not cheap like the US, and it's just not as competitive.
It isn't. It's much easier to start a business. I was reading a statistic about the EIN numbers that have been created this year. The tax IDs for new businesses, startup, are off the charts above where they were in 2019. So this is good, because I know a lot of people who will be watching this will be coming from overseas. And, my wife is from Latin America. I've also spent a lot of time overseas, and the business culture is totally different.
Oh yeah.
The barriers to entry there's less service providers, because it can be difficult in some of these countries just literally to start a business and open an account and get going. Whereas in the United States, that barrier is very
Anyone can
minimal.
open.
Everybody can open. There's
Yeah.
not, it's not what you can do or what you can't do. And that sounds wonderful. It's great for your business. It's great for my business. I think it's also great for the general world, but it makes it that much more difficult if you're a business owner to know that you have to stay on top of your game all the time. And
Yeah.
so
You can die fast and grow fast.
yeah, that's exactly right. And that if you're coming in to do business in the United States, you need a competitive advantage. You need to create these, and franchising does fill that gap because it creates that moat, as you say. That's
Yes.
a great way to describe it. If you're by yourself, it's really hard because someone is going to come in there and they're going to have the finances and they're going to be able to have pricing power and system power and knowledge power. I mean, I tell franchisors, you're selling your mistakes, basically. You know, you've been in this business for 15 years and you've made tons of mistakes. I mean,
Oh yeah.
I think back.
And it's great. And hopefully it's all documented and they're passing those learnings on to the franchisees and they adapted.
Right. And when you're a franchisee and you're like, oh, I have a good idea. Ask your franchisor because they might be like, yeah, that
We
is a
tried
great
that.
idea.
We rolled it out for a couple of weeks. It didn't work out.
Exactly. That was a great idea, but it cost us a lot of money. I still think it's a great idea, but it's not.
Didn't work. Customers didn't buy it.
Exactly. You know, yeah, I love these pickles. I don't know why everybody doesn't love these pickles. At some point, you got to take the pickles off the menu because nobody's buying them. Bring them home.
Exactly.
And so that you get a lot more of that in a franchise type environment. And you know, the contracts, you need to understand it. They're data points. You need to go in there and when, you know, if you're a retail, you really need a lawyer to help bang the lease. You need to get all this stuff in order. You have to plan with an exit in mind. So you have to have all of your house in order to get your financing, to get these things.
And a big thing that we're doing at Vetted Biz is like, what's the value in 5 years? You invested 200K of capital and a lot of hours into this business. Are you going to get just 200K back, 150K back? Are you going to get 600K back? You'd be surprised. I mean, you probably know, actually, a lot of these businesses, franchises, 2000 plus, a lot of them, the market value after 5 years is less than the investment. And that's like a big red flag that we've been seeing more and more of.
It is a red flag, but you don't go into small business to sell it. And I think people have to recognize, and this comes back down to barriers to entry. So a small business is going to sell for like a 3 times multiple. You're in business for the cash flow.
Yes,
you know, people, you know, you're in it for the cash flow. You're in it for the cash flow and the lifestyle and control. You know, sometimes people say, well, I don't want to just buy a job. Why? Ask all the people who got fired and laid off. I bet they wish they owned their job and somebody else didn't own their job. So that's not a horrible thing either. So you're right, but it comes down to why.
What your attention is and probably where you are in your career and cash flow investor, or if you're looking more for an exit, which you can do incredibly well in franchising and have crazy multiples, but it's a different type of investor.
If you're looking for an if you're the exit and the equity, then I think the moat and the barrier to entry has to be capital. And so I think that when you get to the $1.5 million, $2, $3 million franchises, maybe some of those, you know, pet hotels or daycares where it takes you 2 years to even get open because nobody wants you in your backyard. That sounds off-putting, but it's actually wonderful because once you go through that pain, no one else is coming around. Those are the businesses. Now, if you're in a personal services business, you're in it for the cash flow. So you just have to, I guess, decide why you're in it and then kind of go
from
back
the onset
and do that match.
Tom, this has been an awesome discussion. Are there any other kind of last thoughts you would have for prospective franchisees?
You know, I think what we just closed with was the way is know why you're doing it.
Yes.
And go in with reasonable expectations and stay open-minded and know that you're in it. You're not in it against the franchisor, you're in it with the franchisor. And if you ever feel that they're not upholding that end of the brand promise, then there's ways for you to get out and be realistic about it. But, you know, franchising done right, I think has probably created more wealth for individual families than any other business system around. It's wonderful.
Well, Tom, great concluding thought. It was a pleasure to have you on. And next time we'll have to do a talk on more geared towards franchisors, how they
Yeah,
can
no
scale up
problem.
appropriately. But this has been great for franchisees, prospective franchisees out there, even
What you wanted
current
to hear?
franchisees. So
No,
Tom,
that's
really
great. No,
appreciate it.
I love it. Now go, change that green tea out for a real beer. It's getting pretty late.
Exactly. Thanks, Tom.